The image is everywhere. A figure in black, face wrapped, moving through shadow, blade drawn, silent, invisible, deadly. That image is almost entirely fictional. The real shinobi, the people history calls ninja, were something far more interesting and far more strange than anything Hollywood invented. They weren't assassins lurking on rooftops. They were intelligence operatives, infiltrators, information brokers in a world where information could decide the fate of entire domains. And the reason we know so little about them is exactly the point. They were professionals of secrecy, and they were very good at their job. To understand the shinobi, you have to understand the world that made them. The Sengoku period, Japan's century of civil war. From the mid-1400s through the early 1600s, the country was fracturing. Warlords fought over land. Alliances collapsed overnight. And the difference between victory and defeat often came down not to battlefield strength, but to knowing what your enemy was planning before he planned it. In that environment, a specific kind of skill became enormously valuable. Warlords needed people who could move through enemy territory undetected, infiltrate fortifications, gather intelligence, spread disinformation, start fires, observe troop movements, and disappear. These weren't magical powers. They were tradable skills, things that could be taught, refined, and passed down within families and communities. Two regions became particularly known for producing this kind of specialist: Iga province and the Kōka district in Omi, just south of Lake Biwa. The mountainous terrain of both regions had created communities of semi-independent warriors, families who owed loyalty to no single lord and had developed their own expertise in unconventional warfare. The Iga Shu and the Kōka Shu became the names the warlords sought out when they needed something done quietly. The primary function of a trained shinobi was information gathering, not murder, not single combat heroics, intelligence. A skilled shinobi would enter enemy territory in disguise, as a merchant, a monk, a traveling entertainer. They would observe, count soldiers, map fortifications, identify supply lines, then extract themselves without anyone knowing they had been there. The best operations left no trace at all. They also conducted what we'd now call psychological operations, spreading rumors through a town before a siege, leaving signs that created confusion in enemy camps. One documented tactic involved entering a castle at night not to kill anyone, but simply to bang a drum or set a small fire, enough to exhaust the defenders with false alarms before the real attack came. Sabotage was real. Arson was real. Assassination happened too, though it was far less common than legend suggests, and far more likely to target specific military objectives than to be the theatrical one-on-one duel that film prefers. What they were not, in any historical sense, was a formal organization. There was no guild, no unified code, no single master training disciples in a mountain dojo. They were regional specialists, families and clans who maintained particular knowledge and who hired themselves out to whichever lord could pay. The tools of the historical shinobi were practical, not theatrical. Shuriken, the throwing star, was real, but it was a distraction device, not a killing weapon. You threw it to create space, to force your opponent to flinch, to buy seconds. The kunai was a multi-purpose iron tool, closer to a gardening implement than a dagger, used for climbing, digging, and prying as often as fighting. Metsubushi, blinding powder, was carried in hollowed-out eggshells or small ceramic containers. Thrown in an enemy's face, it bought the seconds needed to run. Shinobi were not warriors who sought combat. They were professionals who avoided it whenever possible. Escape was success. Engagement was a failure of planning. Grappling hooks, rope ladders, smoke bombs made from plant materials, all documented, all fitting the same mission: infiltrate, observe, extract. What they did not wear was black. The iconic all-black uniform is a theatrical invention. It comes from the Kabuki stage, where stagehands, who moved props and adjusted sets in full view of the audience, wore black by convention to signal that they were, in a sense, not there. Playwrights depicting shinobi on stage dressed them the same way, and the image fixed itself in the cultural imagination. In actual operations, shinobi wore whatever helped them blend in: a monk's robes, a peddler's clothes. At night, dark indigo or gray, not black, which reads as a silhouette against most surfaces. The most famous shinobi in history was a real person, which is itself remarkable given how little documentary evidence most of them left. Hattori Hanzō was a samurai and military commander from Iga who served Tokugawa Ieyasu through the wars that unified Japan. He helped Ieyasu escape the chaos following the assassination of Oda Nobunaga in 1582, guiding him safely through Iga province, territory where Hanzo's family connections were decisive. He lived until around 1596, served faithfully, and was buried in Tokyo at what is now Sainenji Temple. The legend of a master assassin and sword forger came much later. His name attached itself to stories the way names attach to legends, because he was real enough to anchor them. The best evidence we have for what shinobi training actually looked like comes from the Bansenshūkai, a comprehensive manual compiled in 1676 by Fujibayashi Yasutake, a descendant of one of the Iga clans. It runs to 10 volumes. It covers strategy, ethics, tool construction, psychological tactics, and the philosophy of the shinobi's role. And what it reveals is not a cult of assassins. It reveals something closer to a military intelligence doctrine, a rigorous practical framework for gathering information in dangerous conditions. The Bansenshūkai is also a document of a world that was already ending when it was written. By 1676, the Sengoku Wars had been over for 60 years. The Tokugawa shogunate had unified Japan and was busy suppressing exactly the kind of independent regional power the Iga and Kōka clans had once represented. The Edo period transformed the shinobi from active operatives into something more complicated. Some clans were absorbed into official Tokugawa service. Hattori Hanzo's descendants served as guards for the shogun's castle. Former Iga specialists worked as official inspectors and enforcers, their skills repurposed for peacetime surveillance rather than wartime infiltration. Others simply became farmers. The specialized knowledge stayed in families, passed down quietly, increasingly theoretical as the conditions that had made it practical disappeared. The mythology, meanwhile, grew in their absence. Kabuki plays dramatized shinobi figures throughout the Edo period. Pulp adventure literature turned them into superhuman tricksters. By the time Western audiences encountered ninja through 20th century martial arts films, the image had already passed through 200 years of theatrical distortion. The historical shinobi left almost no records by design. Secrecy was not incidental to their profession. It was the profession. A shinobi who was documented had failed. What remains is a handful of training manuals, some scattered military records, regional clan histories, and a thick layer of legend that has been growing for 4 centuries. The truth underneath that legend is actually more interesting. Small clans from mountain provinces became indispensable to the most powerful warlords in Japan, not through superhuman ability, but through discipline, observation, patience, and the cultivation of a specific kind of knowledge that most people couldn't be bothered to develop. They weren't magic. They were professionals in a world that desperately needed what they offered. And they were careful enough to make sure that almost nobody would ever know exactly how they did it.